Hello everyone, so today we are going to talk about heart's murmur. So starting by asking a question. What is heart murmur? It is a sound that is caused by turbulent flow of blood through a problem within the valve. Maybe it is regurg, maybe it is stenosed, prolapsed, also a defect that can be a congenital. So the idea is that there is a turbulent flow of the blood. So normally the blood flow in a laminar so that the turbulent flow lead to the sound of murmur. Now let's talk about how to identify murmur. Murmur is identified by auscultation, so using a stethoscope. So we just hear by the stethoscope and we put it on the chest of a patient and we just auscultate and identify that the murmur is present. Now what to do? We need to report timing. So what is the meaning of timing? Is it in systole, in diastole, or what? So we need to know what is S1, S2, and S1. S1 mean the first heart sound, which is caused by the closing of mitral and tricuspid. And S2 is caused by closing of the pulmonary and the aorta, the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve. So the time between S1 and S2 is called systole, and the time between S2 and S1 is called diastole. So this is an important aspect. As we are a beginner, we need to put our hands on the carotid in order to identify is it in systole or is it in diastole, the murmur. Now, other important aspect in order to be reported when we find a murmur, which is the duration. What do I mean by the duration? Is it in early systolic and it diminish in mid systolic? Is it a hollow systolic, between S1 and S2? Or what? Is it in early diastolic? Is it in pre-systolic, which is here? And something like this. Another aspect, which is the place. What's the meaning of the place? It means where the best place to hear murmur. Is it in the second right intercostal, second left intercostal, in the lower left sternal angle, or something like this? And finally, which is very important also, to identify the radiation of murmur. Is it radiated to the axilla? Is it radiated to the carotid, to the epigastric area, and something like that? So this is 4 important points in order to be reported in case of murmur. Now, after understanding all of this, we need to know that I'm going to divide or classify the murmurs according to the timing. I think it's much simple to classify it in case of timing than other classifications. So we are going to understand what is systolic murmur and what is diastolic murmur. So systolic in case of aortic or pulmonary stenosis, and in case of mitral or tricuspid regurg. An important thing in order to be kept in mind when I'm talking about pulmonary, it is the same that as I'm talking about aortic. So pulmonary regurgitation is the same as aortic regurgitation in case of murmur, but differ in the place where you hear the murmur, as we talked here, and differ in case of radiation of the murmur. But in case of timing, in case of duration, they are the same. This is also in case of mitral and tricuspid, in case of regurgitation, and in case of stenosis. So first, this is an introduction, a simple introduction about how murmurs are formed, as in the pathophysiology, and what to report, how to hear, and what is the timing. Now let's go into much more details. So talking about systolic murmur. Systolic murmur, we have 3 cases in order to talk more about them. Starting with aortic stenosis. So we have S1, S2, and S2, S1. So this is systole and this is diastole. As we're talking about, this is a systolic murmur, so the murmur must be here in case of S1, S2. Now let's talk about little more things that are happening in the left side of the heart. So this is the left side. Now, what is this? This is the mitral valve. So the blood passes from the left atria into the left ventricle. The mitral is functioning well, so we hear S1 normally. Then the mitral valve will be opened here, so the blood will pass into the left ventricle. The case is here. This is the aortic valve. This is a stenotic valve. So when the blood is filled in the left ventricle and the pressure is building here, the blood will flow from the left ventricle into the aorta through the aortic valve. So if the aortic valve is stenosed, as in such case, this means that it will not open completely. And there is a problem with its opening. I mean, it is stenosed, and then we are going to open them by pressure. So what is going on is that we will hear S1 normally, and then we will hear an ejection click. What is the ejection click? It is an added sound caused by opening of the stenosed aortic valve due to pushing of blood to this stenosed valve. So we will hear first the ejection click, and then the valve is not opened completely. So this is the aortic valve that is not opened completely due to a disease. So the blood will pass through this small way. And this will lead to what? This will lead to the murmur. So we will hear the murmur here. And then decreasing in the intensity. This is a diamond-like murmur which is called crescendo decrescendo. So what is the meaning of a crescendo decrescendo or diamond shape? I mean, there is a low intensity, then it begin to become higher, then it began to decrease again. So why this shape of murmur? This is because that the blood will start to flow more as we are going to increase in intensity here, and then the systole will start to end, so the blood will pass less, so the intensity of murmur will decrease till it stops completely. So the murmur of aortic stenosis is called an ejection click, which start here. So in order to report an aortic stenosis murmur, it is called ejection systolic murmur. Ejection systolic murmur due to the ejection click and due to the stenosed valve. So the aortic stenosis is sometimes accompanied by ejection systolic murmur. Now we need to identify, or we need to know, is that this murmur radiate or not. So this murmur can radiate to the carotid. So we can, after hear the murmur, put our stethoscope on the carotid in order to see if there is a radiation or not. This is an important in grading murmur, as murmur has different grades. So this is the first case. Now let's talk about another case, which is mitral regurg. Now, in case of mitral regurgitation, again, this is the left side. Let's assume that this is the mitral valve and this is the aortic valve again. So the problem here is within the mitral valve. So we will put in our mind that the sound will start directly with S1. We will not hear S1 then the murmur as in case of aortic stenosis, because the defect is within the mitral valve, which cause the first sound. So we will hear the murmur with the first sound itself. Now, regurgitation means that the valve cannot close completely. So as we know that when the blood pass here from the left atria to the left ventricle as a normal physiology, it is supposed that the mitral valve will close completely. But this is not in our case. So as the pressure will start to be building up in case of the left ventricle, the blood will pass from the left ventricle again to the left atria, as the pressure in the left ventricle is much more the pressure in the left atria. So this is the shape and type of murmur in case of mitral regurgitation. Let's see. So what's this? This is a hollow systolic murmur, or a pan systolic murmur. So what is the idea of this? The idea is that the blood will pass again from the left ventricle to the left atria, because the mitral valve will not close completely due to a problem. So this is a case of mitral regurgitation. Yes, the blood will pass here from the left ventricle to the aorta. I'm not saying that the blood is not or will not pass, but the idea is that the blood will also pass from the left ventricle to the left atria, as the mitral valve will not close completely. So this is a hollow systolic murmur or a pan-systolic murmur that's here accompanying S1 and till S2. Another case, which is the mitral valve prolapse. What is the idea here? The idea here is that the mitral valve will be opened and closed normally, but when it's closed, one of the cusp, or maybe two according to the severity, will open, as we will see here. So this is the aorta, the aortic valve. The problem is not here. The idea is that this is the left atria, the left ventricle, the left side. So the blood will pass from the left atria to the left ventricle through the mitral. It will be open and then it will be closed. Now when the pressure is starting to be building up in the left ventricle, what is going to happen? Here is much more pressure, so the pressure will push the cusp of the mitral valve in order to be opened as going to be here. So one cusp will be closed and the other will be open, so the blood will pass from the left ventricle here again against its normal way into the left atria. So what's the shape and what's going on in S1, S2, S1? So it is a systolic, so it's in this duration. What's happening here is that there is a click, but it is not as the ejection click here in case of aortic stenosis. It is a mid-systolic click. So why is a mid-systolic click? Because the idea is that the mitral is open and closed normally, but the click is due to pushing of the pressure in the left ventricle toward the cusp of the mitral valve here. So the idea is that this opening of the cusp of the mitral valve will causing this click, which is mid-systolic click. Now what's the shape of the murmur here? It will be the same as in case of mitral regurg. So the total is that it is a mitral, in case of mitral regurg, a mid-systolic click with systolic murmur, late systolic murmur. So this is the idea. Another point that I forget to talk about, which is in case of mitral regurgitation, the radiation will be to the axilla. So it's important to search for murmur in the axilla as irradiated in order again to grade this murmur. Now talking about the last part, which is diastolic murmurs. Now it is of two cases. The first one is aortic regurgitation. So what is happening here? So let's assume that this is the aorta. This is the aortic valve here. Again, regurgitation means filling of the valve to completely closing. So this is the mitral valve here, the left atria, the left ventricle. So the blood will normally pass from the left atria to the left ventricle, so mitral will be closed normally. The aorta will be open normally, so there is no defect regarding S1, S2. The defect here is within the S2, S1, I mean within the diastolic timing. Let's see what is happening. So the blood will pass to here. Now, this is the aortic valve, which is filled to closed completely. We know that in case of diastole, which is ventricular filling, the left ventricular pressure will start to decrease in order to give an opportunity to the blood to pass from the left atria to the left ventricle. So according to this, the pressure here at the beginning of the diastole will be much more higher than the pressure in case of the left ventricle. So this will lead to cause the blood to return again from the aorta to the left ventricle. So this will cause the murmur itself. The idea is that the murmur will start directly with an S2, and this is in its shape. This is the murmur. It will decrease in the intensity as the pressure will rise in the left ventricle, and it will stop in case of pressure equality in case of the aorta and the left ventricle. And again, the pressure will rise in the left ventricle and no murmur will be heard. So this is an early diastolic murmur. The idea is that all the listed murmur and all the murmurs that we talked about in case of aortic stenosis, in case of mitral regurgitation, it's heard in its place. I mean, the aortic stenosis, it's heard in the right left sternal area, but in case of aortic regurgitation, it is best heard in the lower left sternal angle. This is not the area of the aorta, but if we just put the stethoscope on the area of the aortic valve, we will hear the normal physiology, the normal part of the procedure only. I mean, the opening and the closing of the mitral and the opening of the aorta. We will not hear that regurgitation, the problem of the regurgitation. I mean, we will not hear the returning of blood from the aorta to the left ventricle. I mean, we're not going to hear the murmur. So it is best here in the left lower sternal border, and it is an aortic an early diastolic murmur. This is the case of aortic regurgitation. Now let's talk about another case, which is mitral stenosis. So what is happening here? Again, this is the aorta. And this is the aortic valve. So the problem is that the stenosis inability to open completely. Again, so this is S1, S2, S1, and a timing. So the problem here is that when we want the mitral valve to be open in case of filling of the ventricle, it will be closed. So this is a ventricular filling, mean the diastole, which is here. So basically, due to this closing of the mitral and inability to be open completely, the blood will push the two cusps of the mitral valve in order to open them, and due to this pushing, we will hear something which look like the ejection click in case of aortic stenosis, but in this time it is called an opening snap. An opening snap will be heard here, so we will not hear the murmur accompanying S2 or S1. We will hear S2 and then we will hear an opening snap. We can hear an opening snap. It is not present in all cases, but in most of them we will hear an opening snap. And then what? And then we will hear the turbulent flow of blood through this incompletely open mitral valve. So due to this flowing of the blood, we will hear the murmur. and it will decrease in the intensity as decrease in difference in pressure in the left ventricle or in the left atria. So there is another, let's call it a trick here. Another thing that is going to happen here. There is another rising of murmur before S1. So what is this? We will talk more about it. We all know that the blood passes from the left atria or from the atria to the ventricle due to difference in pressure in the left ventricle on the left atria. But this is not completely what is happening. The left atria in such case, and the atria can be the right or the left, contract its wall to further pushing of blood from the atria to the ventricle. So this is further contraction of the wall of the atria will lead to this pre-systolic accentuation. So finally, let's name the murmur. An opening snap with mid diastolic rumbling murmur with pre-systolic accentuation. So the idea of rumbling, this is a character of the murmur. We just need to list it in the name. We will not talk more about the case of rumbling and the idea of rumbling, the physiology of rumbling in such video, but the idea is that it must be listed in case of murmur. This is a character of murmur in case of mitral stenosis. So again, this is an opening snap here with a mid diastolic rumbling murmur. It is in the mid diastole with pre-systolic or late diastolic accentuation. We just identify the cause of this pre-accentuation due to contraction of the wall of the atria. So now we finish basic murmurs for beginners. At last, thanks for watching and good luck.